In the description below are links to uh, places where you can give money to causes related to what's going on in the world right now with the protests and everything, including GoFundMe's to help financially support the families of George Floyd and um, Ahmaud Arbery, and then there are a few others. So you can click on those and contribute to those causes. Um, and over on Facebook and Twitter, I haven't been able to figure out how to offer words of my own thoughts or feelings, but I've been sharing those of friends and famous people who have been able to figure out what they want to say and have shared it. And I have shared what they have shared. And that's, I think, as far as I can go for now, again, not having figured out, uh, uh, clearly not having figured out what I would say. But there is plenty that's been said, and it's important to hear. And I have appreciated hearing it, and I hope that more people will hear it from my having shared it. But beyond that, this is just going to be what it usually is. And so, but I wanted to start with those elements, the links below, and more on Facebook than on Twitter, but things being said that you should hear, and that I'm pretty sure I'm better and more informed for having heard. But again, starting now, this is just going to be apart from the playing the instrument that I've been working on, because I'm just not feeling like it at the moment. And but so a couple of things, a couple of books that I've been reading that I'll have more to say when I write about them, because I haven't finished most of these books. But I will. I do have more thoughts than I will convey here and now. Possibly with the exception of this one, which I really like, but I'm not positive why. I think that I put more on it than it deserved to have on it. This is Zorba the Greek by Nikos Kazantzakis, and Zorba musical was the first musical that I did professionally out of college. I played, I think it's pronounced Pavli. It's been 11 years, almost. And very small part, but the plot does turn on, to an extent, at least one strand of the plot turns on what happens to him. And when I was in the musical and playing the character, I thought one thing, he's a tragic figure, and because he ultimately, well, because of what happens to him, which I won't say, but because of what happens to him, he seemed to be a tragic figure, and I think that's how we all felt about him. I haven't pulled the cast lately from 2009, but it seemed that he was a character to take pity on. In light of just everything that has happened in the world since, and the way we look at certain things now, and I guess I will say in more specifics in the blog post, but he's kind of an incel, and I never thought that what happens to him the blame should be directed where it is, but it's more like he's the person. He would have before facing his ultimate fate, he would have these days he would have done. Feels really ridiculous to be hiding it. All right, so I'll say for the next minute, I'm going to say what happens to him, and if you care about knowing that, if you're going to read this and you don't want to know, for the next minute, mute, or you can skip ahead. He drowns himself because the woman he's in love with, who everyone else in the village hates, does not return his affections. And what what occurred to me this time reading, because I read this back when I was in it, what occurred to me this time reading was, these days, that person who goes that far might very well have tried to take some people out with him before before killing himself. So that's that was my big revelation about my own character from the musical on this read through. But as far as the things that I put on the book that were perhaps not fair, I think because it's Greek, and because the Zorba in the musical, which I've listened to the recording a lot more than I've read the book, and I've watched the movie once, the Zorba in the musical, so wise and lovable. Zorba here, a lot more scattered and wild and not as lovable. So I think I expected the musical from the book, and that was not fair to the book. It is a very good book, and I intend to keep it and perhaps read it again. But I haven't finished it yet. That's what the ribbon is marking. I will finish it tomorrow. I will blog about it tomorrow, and my feelings will be better expressed tomorrow. Another book that I haven't finished, that I will finish on Wednesday, is this one, which back when the quarantine started and I just finished the Frederick Douglass biography, I half joked that maybe I should start this, and I ended up starting it, and I've stuck to 10 pages a day. I bookmarks here, but that's misleading because there's a lot of index and bibliography and that sort of thing. There's only 20 pages left. I will finish this on Wednesday. I'll blog about it on Wednesday. Basic thoughts. This is not the form for me. Probably when I finally manage to see Hamilton, the musical, I will get a lot more out of it than I got out of this book. Not because, I mean, there's a lot more in this book than there is in the musical, because the musical is about 2 hours long, and the book is more than 700 pages long. But kind of distilled essence is what I'm talking about. So I expect, and that's nothing against the book. Again, some people will get more out of the book than they would get out of the musical, but not me. Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote the musical, 30, 40 years from now, he would make a great Zorba. So I think that we can get theaters reopened in 30 or 40 years, and I think that I'm reading this and I'm thinking, Lin-Manuel Miranda could do this. Oftentimes I will think Lin-Manuel Miranda could write this. In this case, I'm thinking he could do this role. So there's way too much in here to get into, and again, I don't have the connection to it that I have to Zorba the Greek. But if you're staying in, which I guess fewer and fewer people are doing, a 700-page book is not a bad thing to have around and to finally crack open. This book I have finished, and this I actually was going to put in the donate shelf because it's not directly tied to the musical that I bought it in association with. My first musical out of college, I actually started rehearsing for it the day before I graduated. First musical out of high school. It was a community production of Evita. I started rehearsing for it the day after I graduated, day before I graduated high school. And it's not based on the Motorcycle Diaries. The character Che in the musical is not really Che Guevara. And it doesn't even really take place in the same stretch of time. But since at the time I was a naive teenager, at the time I was thinking, and I was also going on it having been the role having been originated by Mandy Patinkin, but I thought one day I could play Che. I probably won't, but he was the character I was interested in. The guy who played Che had his own iron-on red stars that he used to make his own black hat with a red star, and he gave me one, and I got a little black hat, and I made my own, and I was Che for Halloween. Again, it was a different time and I was a more naive person. I did not darken my skin for the Halloween costume, and I did it in part to impress a teacher who was really into Che, and she didn't seem to care. But that was my Che Guevara um, phase, and that is why I had this book. And this is the first book that I read in college that wasn't assigned to me. One of the first books that I read in college at all, and it was the right time, I think. He wrote this. Well, he notes on a Latin American journey. He took the notes on a journey up the. Let's see if I can find the map of the journey. Up along the west coast of South America. Is it back here? There's a map in here. So mostly along Chile here to Peru, and as he goes, he talks about the culture, the current culture that he encounters, the people. He talks about the history. It's really, really interesting, and I ended up deciding to keep the book because, because it's interesting. It's more than it would seem to be, and it also probably benefited from it being a travelogue that I could follow to an extent. There are nice pictures in there, a lot of them taken by the man himself. This is not him. This is the guy who played him in the movie. I didn't realize that this book wasn't really, let's see. He, of course, wrote it in the 50s when he took the journey, but it wasn't published until 1993. I thought that this was a book that had been around and that this was just the tie-in edition of a book that had been around for decades. The book had been published in 1993, and it was a very young book when it was made into a movie, as far as books go, even though it had been actually, the words from the man were decades old, but not having been published. He, of course, is famous for certain things in history, and I would love to read an actual biography of him that goes into details about these things, because around the time that I was Che for Halloween, it was the first time I also was told that he was a very violent person, and that the people who wear the shirts that have his face on them don't understand that he did a lot of harm. But he's revered in circles. He is hated in circles. I want to get into that actual biography at some point so that I can judge for myself, because just reading about him on Wikipedia or anywhere else on the internet doesn't quite cut it for me, feeling like I understand the person. But the person in this book who was in the final stages of becoming a doctor and was traveling around South America helping people, especially lepers who were cast. I mean, one of the synonyms for outcast is leper. You are cast out of society if you're a leper. There are leper colonies. It's kind of like there's a castle-like building around the corner from where I live that used to be a cancer hospital because people were afraid of cancer. There is a crumbling castle-like building on Roosevelt Island that was, I think, it was a smallpox hospital because people were afraid of smallpox. They did bring in the hospital ship, and they put up those tents in Central Park for COVID-19 patients, but that's not because we had to separate them from the rest of the hospital population. It was because there were too many. But there were no buildings went up specially for COVID-19 cases because we don't do that to patients anymore. But he was helping lepers at a time when they were outcasts, and nobody wanted to be anywhere near them. If they were a healthy person, they didn't want to be anywhere near the lepers. They were afraid. That's who this person was. Whoever he became, that's who this person was. I think this is a very inspirational sort of thing. I wonder if it's required reading for med students. I will possibly ask some medical professional friends of mine if they've ever read this, if they were encouraged to read it. It seems like like more people should read it, and I really enjoyed it. And I will learn more about Che at another time. And before I get to the main event, I am proud of having made these bags. I'll just hold them up. do not advocate right now going out for many reasons. Some reasons, obviously, good reasons to go out, but not for buying new clothes. Uh, wear your clothes out, and when you've worn them out, make other things out of them. I have one more. Um, my mom made things like this for us when we were kids, and I have wanted to do the same. My stitching is awful, and these are the first two buttons I've ever sewn. These are sized. I mean, you could put whatever in them, whatever fits, but they are sized to go with books. The biggest of these could fit that Hamilton book that I maybe when I take it to donate it, if that sort of thing ever happens again. But I am proud of having made these. I had a pair of black jeans, obviously, and huge holes appeared right below the back pockets, and so I couldn't wear them anymore. I decided I'm going to finally make those pant leg pouches that were made. Mom made for us when I was a kid, and so that's all I'll say about those because that's all there really is to say about them. These are the longest. The straps are 2 lengths of thigh section of the pants, and they it's not like a sling. It doesn't go far down. It's just about here. But that's all it needs because these are for short walks with a book, and you don't want to be holding on to the book. So anyway, the main event. One of the things that I miss most about society is going through secondhand shops, used book sales, finding hidden, obscure little treasures, often very old. This is an issue of Life magazine from October 22nd, 1945. A friend was going through, I guess, somebody's very old things, found a bunch of magazines, and said, I have some Life issues from the 50s, from the 40s. Does anyone want them? And it's an odd thing to ask, but it happened to be the perfect thing for me to be asked, because I said, do you have the one from October 22nd, 1945? And he said, let me look. And yes, he did. And I said, does it have this article? And he looked through it, and it said, and when we get to that article, I will show you. And he said, yes, it's there. So he said he would send it to me. And he did. And then a couple of weeks later, we were checking, and it said it had been delivered, which it hadn't. Or maybe it hadn't, someone stole it, but that doesn't really happen here. Long story short, eventually, obviously, I did get it, because a couple weeks after that, and I started going through, and he was going to start going through, filling out the form, saying, my package is lost, maybe I should get a refund, stuff like that. But then I checked the tracking number one more time, and it said, it has been held at the facility for the required amount of time. It will be returned to sender. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just ask him to hold on to it. And I thought, no, there are steps that I can take. And I called, and that was, of course, a ridiculous thing, because the post office is swamped now and in grave danger, and you should buy stamps and use the post office so that it has some support. But I went, and I showed the tracking number. I told the guy the tracking number, and he actually did go and find the package. So it has a happy ending, but and I thought that it would be fun. I haven't looked through it. I have confirmed that my the article that I wanted, and I'll show you when I get to it, is in there, but I haven't really looked through it. So I thought I would do that for this video for the first time. So this is obviously some kind of football player on the Ohio State Star halfback. That's not why I wanted the magazine, but here we go. I do enjoy the feel of a really old published paper. I don't have many playbills that are this old. Actually, I kind of do. So I will, if I find something worth holding up and showing, I will certainly do that. Is an advertisement for the Bell telephone system. So in 1945, they were still trying to get people to get telephones. Pinocchio. Oh, there's an ad for Pinocchio. Here, I guess that was When You Wish Upon a Star. Ask when you can see it at your favorite theater. So, full-length feature in Technicolor. Back when Pinocchio was a new movie. Car ad. I hope this isn't boring, or doesn't turn out to be boring. It's hard to turn these pages. Baby oil ad. Speaking of pictures, Radar made these new portraits of U.S. cities. This was Google Earth in the 1940s. Let's see, there's what's close? There's Chicago right there, and St. Louis, New York down here in the bottom. Let's see, there's New York. Radar. Now we have Pluto. Not in the magazine. Wait, Pluto, I think, is a black hole is the most exciting scientific picture that we have nowadays. Hand cream ad, Johnson's baby lotion. I will look at some of these things more closely. Maybe eventually I'll read this whole thing. But this is mostly for, here's a Chrysler ad. This is mostly for what catches the eye when I'm being filmed. It's an experiment, and I'm planning to do more experiments with my videos. There's, I like to do researched video descriptions of obscure musicals, and I'm saying that out loud so that even though very few people will actually hear me say it on this video, I will know that there's the possibility that a lot of people will hear it and some of them will expect it, and that puts a little bit of pressure in my own mind on me to actually do it. Harry Truman takes a trip. Rare ability of solving problems. Has to be key. Yeah, I guess this is Harry Truman. In Caruthersville, which is where? There he is at Fort Knox. Maybe Caruthersville is near Fort Knox. Or maybe it's in Missouri. Minor Caruthersville crisis occurred when it was discovered that no hotel room had been reserved for the governor of Missouri. So maybe it's not Missouri. You could look it up. So there's a bunch of pictures of Harry Truman, who was president at the time and was traveling around. In 1945, there wouldn't have been an election. It wasn't an election year. But, I don't know. A racehorse. That doesn't look like... That looks like the Panama Canal. Picture of the week. The USS Baton of Task Force 62 sails through Panama Canal's Miraflores locks. The Panama Canal. And where's the ship? I guess the ship's right in the middle. Kind of boxed in by the roads. Revolt in Saigon. There's a word for Japanese people that wouldn't appear in a magazine today. I hope you're having more fun than I am. It's not that I'm not having fun, I just hope that Sheen covered converts communist. Catholic leader brings daily worker editor back into the church. America's favorite soup. Campbell's tomato soup. Soup most folks like best. Not everyone. Most folks. Here's good eating, here's good cheer. America's favorite soup is here. I do it with eggs and cheese and bird's eye spinach. Ah, bird's eye. Nazi walks into a trap. Bird's eye is frozen food. It's also apparently used in theater by some people that I have worked with to say the show is frozen. We're not going to make any more changes to the show. It is going to open the way it is. As a way of saying, because Bird's Eye is frozen, and I heard them say that, and I was confused. But I've since seen Bird's Eye in the refrigerators at shopping malls. Now this is why I wanted this copy of this magazine. Mike the Headless Chicken Rooster. And I won't make you look at that for too long, but I wrote an Atlas Obscura entry about. It ended up being about a sculpture of Mike the Headless Rooster in his hometown in Colorado. You can imagine what it is, but I'll just say it basically. The bird's head was cut off, and the bird continued to live. You've probably heard the phrase that running around like a chicken with its head cut off. A lot of chickens do run around with their heads cut off, but they don't live for a year and a half, which Mike did, and that's why Mike was special. And when I was writing it, I said, that my editor said, "Are you sure this is a real thing?" And I said, "It was reported in Time magazine and Life magazine. It was also reported in Time, but this is a Life magazine, and which is ironic considering the subject matter." But I said it was reported on in legitimate magazines at the time. Of course, I wasn't there. I don't think there's footage, but the headless chicken that was still alive, was toured and was reported on. Headless rooster, beheaded chicken lives normally after freak decapitation by axe. It wasn't quite a normal life because he couldn't peck his own food. He had to be fed. His esophagus was open to the wind, and they would put kernels of corn down into it. So that is why I wanted this magazine. That's. But I'm hoping to find other reasons. Here's some more pictures, including a picture of how Mike was nourished. And again, I won't hold them up for too long because they're disturbing pictures. But yes, that is why it's the closest thing that I could possibly possess to proof that this headless chicken, who was around for a year and a half after his head was cut off, was real. Dame May Woody acts at 80. First lady of the British stage enlivens a dull Broadway melodrama. Well, I won't embarrass the play by saying out loud what the play was, but 80-year-olds on Broadway before Broadway shut down. I saw, what was her name? The woman who was a member of Parliament in England for decades in between theater gigs. I saw her in King Lear twice. Let me just quickly look that up. Glenda Jackson. Glenda Jackson, at the time that I saw the production of King Lear, which was last year, she was 82. She was 82 when I saw her in King Lear twice. So I guess at the time, an 80-year-old in a Broadway show was a bigger deal. But now, Angela Lansbury, James Earl Jones, Joel Grey, late 70s, early 80s, late 80s into their 90s, it's becoming more common. Oh, here's a nice Jolly Green Giant. That's a very nice Jolly Green Giant. He looks very young, which I guess he would be because it was 1945 compared to now. Here's a 2-page spread for enamel, nail enamel, and lipstick for matching fingertips and lips. Grandma's recipe for Snyder's chili sauce. New cars. A visitor to Detroit finds he will be able to buy a 1946 version of a 1942 car by the end of next summer. I'm not really into cars, except for they are pretty, but I don't know much about them. There's a swan with a head, so that's not interesting. There's another car. More about cars. The car article continues. The car article is the football player was the cover story. I think I passed his story. There goes your London Express. Designed to carry 112 passengers in luxurious comfort. It's a Zeppelin. Goodyear Aircraft Corporation. Goodyear blimp. I get it. Doctors prove 2 out of 3 women can have lovelier skin in 14 days. Is that Bing? Yes, the voice of Bing Crosby probably has been heard by more people than the voice of any other human being who ever lived. Bing Crosby. Vitamins, seen in a new perspective. It's big, it's beautiful, it's Buick. Just a nice pretty picture of a car. Again, I hope this is more interesting for you than it is for me, because I do find it interesting, but it's more important that you find it. How far? Okay, so I'm going for about a half hour, and probably about half of that has been doing this. That's what a laptop was in 1945. Okay, what's this? Millions of miles to find a better half. Okay, so it's about tires. I thought it would be more interesting. Looks like a tube that, like a high-speed travel tube. Pages are dry, my fingers are dry from all the hand washing. And I don't want to wet my fingers because it's delicate paper. What is that? The answer to the $64 question arrived today. Looks like it's a baby, or maybe it's a pen. I don't know. Not worth showing off. The California way of life, climate, and the automobile create a new pattern of indoor-outdoor living. $3,000 a year. Fireman's family loves to live in the sun. Guess this was life on $3,000 a year in 1945. Looks good. It's a good deal. $10,000 a year. Amphibious life. Doesn't look very amphibious to me. There's a pool. That's it. almost done. As an experiment, it may be a failed experiment. But I think the headless chicken was worth it. There's a fun picture of a dog. Ex-soldier comes back to football. Ah, that's the thing. Guess he went away to World War II, came back to finish college and play football. A lot of smoking advertisements, including the famous Lucky Strike. Bizarre bookbinder. He uses snake skin, skunk skin, human skin. That's worth looking at. Here's the skunk skin, I guess. I wonder if anyone ever had blood poured or red paint representing blood poured on their bookbinding, because it was fur. Nothing fits except that's another cigarette, so I won't show that. That was that experiment. If you're protesting, be safe. If you're going outside at all, be safe. And I guess, you know, I want to say we'll get through this. I don't know for certain. I don't know what anything will lead to. But continue to hope. End of the virus, end of the violence. It's harder and harder to hope, but I do still hope. So that's that. Those are the books, the magazine, the bags, and failure is impossible.